All right, so this is the second part of skin cancer. We ended here and now we're here. I just wanted to begin this part by giving you a little bit of historical context. This picture right here is called the Edwyn Smith Papyrus, which is unfortunate because Edwyn Smith did not write it. He just found it. So maybe it should be named after where it was found. I don't know. But at any rate, this is, as it says right here, the world's oldest written description of cancer, found in Egypt back 3000 BC. So it's 2020, so we're talking 5,000 years ago. People were documenting cancer and knew enough about it to know back then that there was no treatment. So this particular description is of a breast cancer tumor, I believe. There we go. Yeah, ulcers of the breast. Not necessarily the historical record, but the archaeological record shows, what am I trying to say, skeletons in mummies, both in Egypt and also, I want to say South America, but don't quote me on that. Dating back also to the beginning of mankind with osteosarcomas or bone cancer. So we know cancer may be on the rise now, and pollutants and chemicals definitely play a role in promoting cancer, but it is also part of just the natural process of your body not working properly. The name cancer comes from the Greek karkinos, for, I believe it was spider, who thought that, no, crab, there it is, sorry, crab. And somebody thought that the tumor just sort of reminded them of a crab, the way the legs of a crab would spread out. This tumor was just sort of growing and spreading out in a way that made somebody think of a crab. So that's where the word cancer comes from. This book I just want to recommend to anybody that is curious and has some serious time to dedicate to it. This is not summer beach reading. It's fairly long, fairly dense, but I think approachable. You don't have to have a degree in medicine to read it and understand it. This doctor who wrote it, Siddhartha Mukherjee, is a oncologist, I believe somewhere in America, but he treats patients, and a lot of it is not necessarily written from the perspective of the patient, but he includes vignettes of his patients just to sort of ground it in humanity, because a lot of writing about cancer is just very much about the cancer, and it's easy to lose track of the patient and their experience and how surgery and radiation and chemotherapy affect the patient. He does not leave that part out, which makes it just a bit more of a compassionate, humanistic read. But it's really good. He goes all the way back to the beginning of our understanding of cancer and talks about the development of different treatments and why some have worked and some have failed. He doesn't seem to pull many punches. There are quite a few people, especially surgeons, in his book that do not come off looking very good. So go ahead, give it a read if you have time. It's a really well-written book. For this discussion, I was going to skip over the parts of the case study about risk and assessing the mole, because all of that will be in the answers, which I will post for you. I wanted to pick up at number 10, question 10. Think about the layer of the skin a melanoma originates in, and try to describe all the tissue layers and structures a cancer cell would have to go through, blah, 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 blah. Right, so you want to remember we're talking about melanocytes. They're going to start in the stratum basale. So the first thing they are going to have to do if they want to get down to a blood vessel is make their way through the basement membrane. Before we get back to that, we can also list, right? Once they make it through the basement membrane, now they're in the dermis. They're in the papillary layer of the dermis, which would have blood vessels in it. And then to get into the blood vessel, right, there's going to be some connective tissue on the outside of the blood vessel, some sort of basement membrane, and then an epithelium lining the inside of the blood vessel. So they have to navigate the basement membrane, they have to make their way through some connective tissue, find a blood vessel, and get through another membrane and sneak in between two cells. So they probably have to break apart some tight junctions. But quite a few hurdles in the way of our cancer cell. I just again wanted to point out, now this should really be this way, it works better this way. There we go. Right? This is the bottom of your skin cell. This is the basement membrane or basal lamina. We are remembering that this is not a phospholipid bilayer. This is not a cell membrane. This is just a collection of proteins, which if you were to look up at this orange layer here with all these different colors in it, right, it would look like this. And all these different colored proteins here are represented over there in some way or another. Just occurred to me that these greens here are the same as those greens there. So this green attaching the cell to the basement membrane is this green here attaching, this is supposed to be the cell to the basement membrane. So cancer cells have to be able to figure out how to biochemically disassemble that. I then ask you to look up diapedesis. This is what diapedesis looks like. Here you have a leukocyte. This is a white blood cell. And there are, I think it's supposed to be attracted by these chemokines here. So if you have infection or tissue damage, different inflammatory chemicals get released. One of the things that inflammatory chemicals do is attract white blood cells. So if these chemicals make their way into the bloodstream, this white blood cell is going to pick up on that. It then attaches itself to the epithelium of the blood vessel, separates two epithelial cells, breaks apart biochemically the connective tissue around the blood vessel, and then physically locomotes, pulls itself through this hole, and then goes in search of whatever infection it's trying to find. And then macrophages, which is what we call a white blood cell that has started phagocytizing things that aren't supposed to be there, can also make their way back into the bloodstream. I then asked you to look up what the heck is a dendritic cell. And hopefully I told you to use Langerhans instead, because that's the older term. That you're liable to find more examples of Langerhans cells than dendritic cells, and dendritic cells show up in a bunch of different places, so it just gets confusing. So Langerhans cells start out in the bloodstream as a type of white blood cell called a monocyte. That monocyte then crawls out of the bloodstream, diapedesis, makes its way through the basement membrane, and then starts crawling around in your epidermis in search of bacteria and viruses to eat that aren't supposed to be there. So here you have a cell that can make the journey as part of homeostasis from the blood into the dermis, through the basement membrane and into the epidermis. And there are even times when the Langerhans cells will make the reverse journey. The way I understand it, the reason why this happens is that they report back to the bloodstream and interact with other members of your immune system and alert the immune system to the presence of bacteria in the skin. So it helps mobilize your entire body's responses if you've got an infection somewhere. So here we have a cell that can move in and out of the epidermis. Especially you want to pay attention to, it can make this reverse journey from the epidermis through the basement membrane and into, in this case it's the lymph, But traveling through the lymph is another way that blood vessels get from one part of the body to the other. So moving between tissues is a normal homeostatic process. If a tumor cell develops a mutation that turns on one of the genes that controls this process, right? It's developed into a melanocyte. It is thinking to itself, I am just supposed to sit still. This is what I do. I'm a melanocyte. I churn out melanin. But if it gets misregulated and one of the genes that causes movement gets turned on, then this former melanocyte is now going to start moving. So just again to reinforce that everything that a cancer cell does is a normal part of homeostasis. But with cancer, it's the wrong cells doing it at the wrong time. And because these cells originated in your body, your immune system is not really good at identifying them as dangerous and killing them, because your immune system is better at recognizing what's foreign and not just recognizing cancerous. So it's just really hard to treat because it's hard for your immune system to attack it, and any drug that is going to affect the tumor is also going to inhibit healthy homeostatic processes elsewhere in the body. So there's always going to be side effects. Then, this is my own little theory about why melanoma is so invasive and so aggressive, more so compared to basal cell carcinoma and squamous cell carcinoma. And it has to do with the embryonic origins of melanocytes, which is a totally interesting story in and of itself and worth your time, so stick around, you're going to want to hear this. So there is this population of cells called neural crest cells. So when you are first developing, this is you here. This yellow thing underneath you is your yolk sac. But this part right here is what is going to develop into you. So you are this, actually you're just this blue layer here, because this is going to be your amnion. So you're the yellow, the brown, and the blue. These three layers right there are going to develop into you. At some point, this little thing called a notochord forms. It instructs the tissue above it to start to rise up. You see those two little ridges there? This blue part right here is going to form your spinal cord and brain. So you can see it forms a groove, and then it pinches off and becomes a tube. This is called your neural tube. As this is happening, there are cells right here, part of this brown tissue there. Oh no, actually it's blue tissue that breaks away from the neural groove, and those are called the neural crest cells. So here again, this is what was blue here, this thing. And at this stage right here, when the tube is pinching off on itself, cells that are part of the yellow tissue here, or what was blue tissue before, migrate away. These are called neural crest cells because they come off of this crest right here. They actually crawl throughout your developing body, throughout the embryo, and set up shop in different parts of your body and really take on a wide array of different cell types. So in some places they end up as smooth muscle, in some places they end up as osteoblasts, adipocytes, chondrocytes, and melanocytes. So if we just look here, this picture right here is some of the tissues that has some neural crest cell derivation, or some neural crest cells that help form these tissues. So it's a bunch of different tissues in the body. Some, and again, what was I trying to say? A bunch of different parts of the body and also different tissues. So it affects cartilage and bone and muscle and even neurons. So there's a lot going on with these neural crest cells. But I thought what was interesting is that, right, they form the melanocytes. So the melanocytes' history is it was once a cell whose job it was to crawl all around the body. And there might be something about the way the melanocyte that is set up wherein it's retaining some of its ability to crawl. Like it hasn't deactivated all of those biochemical pathways, and it's a little bit easier to get a formerly crawling cell to become a newly crawling cell, as opposed to, cancer of your osteocytes, most of which have never been a neural crest cell. But that's just my theory on things, and I wanted to mention neural crest cells because they're totally cool. That's it. I was short, 15 minutes. I think I covered everything I wanted to cover, just to give you a little bit of perspective, at least on skin cancer. That's it. Thanks for sticking around.